morning. Welcome to Lagoon Newspaper Review. I am Timileyin. With me here at my right, I'm having
Okpeyemi.
welcome Okpeyemi
And Samuel.
welcome Samuel.
Covenant.
Moyo.
Yeah, welcome. And welcome to Newspaper Review. And to join us, you can join us on Facebook at Lagoon Radio Nigeria. You can join us on YouTube also at LagoonTV and on all our social media platform at Lagoon Radio NG and at Lagoon Radio NG on Instagram and Twitter. Okay, so we are moving straight to the business of the day. Okay, with me here, I'm having Authority Newspaper. And Zodima vowed to implement report on IG staff salary verification. You can find this on page 10 on Authority Newspaper. Dangote Additional Russia Okorosha Kubana Burna Boy others feature on the beauties of Nigeria. You can find that on page 16 of the Authority Newspaper. Former Hapga scribe Shikafi joins APC national chairmanship race, and that is on page 11. Anambra Gomba, how Obiora Okonko is tearing Catholic apart. You can find that on page 17 on the Authority Newspaper. And at the middle of the front page, we have Lamido, Mark, Aliyu, McAfee, others in testify lobby for chairmanship. And we have CTTE gets new November date as sale of forms begin today. Not most consensus candidate. And we have a picture at the front. I think the picture was taken during the meeting, and we can find that in the Authority Newspaper. It's about PDP conversion. And INEC in shortfall of ad hoc staff for Anambra Guba Post. We can find that on page 22 of the Authority Newspaper. 2023 presidency, Zuni or not, Southeast must not be screamed out. Mnabi. We can find that on page 7 of the newspaper. Why PDP lost the presidency in 2015, Chief Dokpesi. We can find that on page 20. And NCC vow to protect telecom consumer against unfair practice. And we can find that on page 4 of Authority Newspaper.
And on to this Nigerian newspaper, we have, at the top of the page, we have no preferential treatment for separatist bandits. FG says. You can find that on page 29. And under that, we have IPOB vows to stop consumption of cow meat in Southeast. We can find that on page 22 of the newspaper. And at the middle of the newspaper, we have 2023 battle for Aso Rock. Tinubu game on. Right under that, we have supporters of the presidential ambition of former Lagos governor intensified campaign. Bank on northwest and southwest zones. Cautious over south and southeast. We can find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Right under that, we have Serap tells Buhari to prune 26 billion naira presidency budget for Muse others. You can find that on page 7. Under that, we have 37 billion naira National Assembly Renovation Fund still with FCDA, ex-House of Reps clerk. You can find that on page 6. And that is all for this Nigerian newspaper.
And then on Business AM, Nigeria holds out as global tax reform imposing 15% on MNEs takes off 2023. You can find that on page 2 on Business AM. And on the middle of the newspaper, 2022 appropriation bill, analysts see debt trap ahead as budget exposes fiscal weakness. 16.4 trillion expenditure amid growing debt stocks. Huge borrowing plan for deficit financing and set up for the debt trap, Alanis warrants. You can find that on page 2 also. And then Alanis forecast lagging NGX. You can find that on page 3. Finance and investment, Airtel Airtel, Safaricom goes high. You can find that on page 11. And insurance and pension brokers offer personalized service. Page 14. Transport business. You can find that on page 29. Commodities and agriculture. Maize closing Nigeria's supply gap. Page 23. And that is all for Business AM.
On the daily assets, the major headline here says bandits kill 20, injure 30 others in Sokoto community. Says gunmen attack police station, kidnap nursing mother in Adamawa. Plateau Monarch seeks prayer for protection, peace. NCC rolls out measures to deepen e-government. There is no specific page for that, I think. He said continues on page 2. And Nupeng suspends planned nationwide strike. You can find that on page 5. Jonathan Aisha Buhari Atiku others bag West African Regional Awards. You can find that on page 4. FG winning war against tourism, says Lai Mohammed. You can find that on page. The page is not that clear, but you can find that on the Daily Asset newspaper. Niger police nabbed 3 gun runners. You can find that on page 7. 25 million Nigeria risks job losses over poultry industry crisis. You can find that on page 15. Aku Uka of Ukari, Shekaro Angru dies at 84. Says Jukun ruler spent 45 years on throne. Ishaku mourns late monarch. And lastly, Plateau local government polls. APC clears 17 chairmanship, 325 councillorship seats, and you can find that on page 23. That's all for daily asset.
On Nigerian Tribune, on the front page, so 2022 budget, state house operations to go up 24 billion. You can see that on page 3 of the newspaper. 1.6 billion for vehicles replacement, spares, international travels, 1.53 billion, 400 million proposed for Villa Telecom infrastructure replacement. Fresh controversy over Supreme Court. You can see that on page 3. Sanctioned 62 billion oil money. 9 killed on Iseyin Ibadan highway auto crash. You can see that on page 26. 15 billion revitalization funds. Strike looms in polytechnics. You can see that on page 25. We are fed up with FG non-responses as soup. NDLEA dismantles drug joints in Lagos. Oyo, Kwara, arrest 110 dealers. You can see that on page 26. How Nigeria can improve maize production through AFC FTA. You can see that on page 13. Autumn, IU splits north as 8th fight for PDP chairmanship, leaving presidency ticket open in PDP reside for disaster. Bode George, you can see that on page 23. How debt service low revenue threatens 2022 budget. You can see that on page 6. And that is all for Nigerian Tribune.
Moving on to leadership newspaper. On the first page, at the top, you're having Nigerians kick as FG approved genetically modified maize. We can find that on page 8 of the newspaper. And $33.5 billion external debt. Each Nigerian owes foreign creditors 64.84 naira. You can find that on page 4. So this is an information for all of us. We are owing foreign creditors 64,784 naira.
Can you imagine that?
Money that I did not receive. Okay, moving on. On the middle of the newspaper, we're having who is Nigeria owing? We are owing IDA $11.62 billion. We are owing Ibonel $10.37 billion. Then we are owing a lot of companies. We are owing in China, I think, and a lot like that. Then moving to the down part of the page, puts Nigeria in right direction. Bakari tells PMB. You can find that on page 4. And under it, we have launches Nigeria for Nigerians for Nigeria End for End campaign. Then follow it, we have only God can give, take life, says Tinubu. You can find that on page 6. And we have the the Naira untold story, insecurity implicated. You can find that on page 1 of the newspaper, and that's on leadership newspaper.
And on to National Economy newspaper. At the top of the page, we have e-Naira will increase cross-border trade, tax efficiency, says CBN. We can find that on page 4 of the newspaper. And at the middle of the page, we have concerns mount over Nigeria's dependency on borrowing to finance budgets. We can find that on page 4. And versatile insurance practitioners at AIICO Insurance PLC. We can find that on page 4. And under the page, we have FG license first batch of MSME Business Development Service Providers. You can find that on page 8. Stockbrokers to unfold new strategy for economic development. We can find that on page 5 of the newspaper. And that will be all for national economy.
And on New Telegram, H1, and that's on top. Interest on FG's overdraft gobs 587.56 billion naira. Got 1.9 trillion from the CBN last year. You can find that on page 2. NUPEC suspends planned nationwide strike. That's on page 23. And then 2023, Bello enclosed door meeting with Emir of Zazao, Northern Elders chair in Zaria. You can find that on page 26. Tinubu reunites with associates as Sanwo-Olu hosts APC leader. You can find that on page 25. 2023, PDP not polarized over zoning, autumn. You can find that on page 2. And KAP to train 300,000 Nigerian youths in film production. You can find that on page 28. And then Jega, APC, PDP misleading Nigerians since 1999. Tackles NASS for downplaying e-transmission of polls results. You can find that on page 3. 2023. Nigeria needs competence, not zoning. Tunde Bakari, you can find that on page 2. Federal government eyes 90.7 billion naira privatization proceeds to finance 2022 budget. You can find that on page 3. And then study, staring at screens for long could increase short-sightedness risk. You can find that on page 26. And that will be all for news. New Telegram.
Now on the Daily Times newspaper, FMCA kicks off workshop for media practitioners in Northeast today. You can find out on page 2 of the Daily Times newspaper. No preferential treatment between separatist bandits, says federal government. Says government winning war against terrorism. You can find that on page 2. Underneath says address reasons for agitations in Nigeria. Southeast Bishop tells federal government. Former INEC chairman Prof. Jega advocates electronic voting. NUPEC suspends proposed nationwide strike, and you can find those stories on page 2, page 14, and page 3. And lastly, Tinubu says only God can take my life. You can find that on page. I can't really see the number, but you can find it on I think it's on page 5 of the daily newspaper, Daily Times newspaper, and that was all on the Daily Times newspaper.
On daily news,